Over here I've got Greg Meaker, who is a former DPI Livestock Officer, who has experience in the drought planning and stock management areas, probably in the early 2000s, you'd say?
Yeah, basically from the millennium drought.
Yeah. So it's great to have Greg on board. He's come down from Goulburn yesterday and stayed in Holbrook and travelled out here this morning. He's going to be talking to the essentials and basics about setting up stock management areas, from pen design and how you select your site based on soils and slope and the different materials you might choose to use. And he'll also be touching onto the confinement feeding aspect as well. Other important faces around the room are of course Emma. She is one of our Ag Project Officers. She's also responsible for our resilient pastures and tropical pastures projects as well. We've got Peter at the back here, who is our Communications Officer. He is going to be taking photos and videos. Some of those videos might include audio from the day as well, and those just get used on our social medias and our website as well. So if you have any issues with your likeness or images being used on that type of stuff, please let Peter know and we'll take a note of it and we'll try and avoid including you in those things. What else do I have? I have to do an acknowledgement of country. So we are standing on Wiradjuri country today, and essentially I just want to pay our respects to the traditional owners, past, present and emerging elders, and other First Nation people who call this country home. So if you haven't already, we have a attendance sheet at the back. If you can sign onto that, that would be awesome. If you want to be kept in the loop about other stock management stuff that we are running, I'd love it if you include your email if it's different to the email that you registered on Eventbrite. No stress if you don't, but it would be great to keep you in the loop with the stuff that we're doing. So location of some facilities, obviously we've got morning tea in the front here. I've got an information table at the back which has an assortment of resources from MLA and Department of Primary Industries and a couple LLS stuff. You'll also notice that there is a new guide to containment feeding for cattle and sheep, which has been developed by State Local Land Services and published. I can get Emma to probably hand some of those out during sort of our morning tea break, or you can pick up a couple. I have plenty to go around. Location of the Portaloo, just so that we don't need to be going through Marcus's house, is go out here, turn left, and it's just on the grassy hill up there. Pretty hard to miss. We do have first aid and a defibrillator, and if anyone, I would be the delegated first aid officer as well, if that's necessary. I've already told you about the Saving Our Soils project, so I'm just going to outline today's presentations. So Greg Meaker is going to be talking about establishing and feeding stocking management areas. We're going to have a morning tea at about sort of 10:15, probably about 10:30 I reckon, because we're running a little bit later. During this time we're going to have a video of the stock management area just playing on loop, so you can get an idea from the air of the type of area that Marcus is currently using. Then we're going to go into investing in stock management areas with Tanisha, and we're going to have a look and work on that tool as well that I was saying. And then we're going to duck up and do a site walk and talk as well. Following the site walk and talk, I will have sandwiches available for you to take home as well, because I know by that time it'll be pushing close to maybe 1:30 and people might be getting a bit peckish. So that's pretty much the brief of it all. I'm going to hand over to Greg now so he can take off on his talk, and yeah, go for it.
Thanks, Jess.
Just click that one whenever you need to go.
Oh, yes. Okay. How many of you have got, for want of a better word, confinement areas already set up? I know Marcus has. This is so there are a few. Yeah. What were the sort of issues that you've had as an after event? In other words, you've operated in them. What are some of the issues that you like about them, don't like about them?
My drainage is wrong.
Drainage, definitely. Yeah.
I feed at the low end.
At home, my drainage is wrong too. Yeah. Yeah, drainage seems to be one of the big issues in the whole system. Because selecting the site is always a compromise, because you've got so many factors to look into. So what I'd like to do is just run through the fact that, like, all the considerations. Please pull me up at any stage and ask any questions. I'm just used to that. So there's a fair, I've tried to keep the wording right down. You've got a copy of the slides in front of you, so when we go down confinement fee, principally there's no development consent required, right? As compared to in a feedlot situation where development consent is required. But there's something interesting in both of them. And it's that word there, intensively held. And no different from in the feedlot situation. So when we understand what that intensively held means as a you know, in relationship to the management of the stock, whether they be sheep and or cattle, is that our lives change. So when you make a decision to put in confinement pens, and that's how you're going to manage the stock through the difficult time, whether that be a drought, the aftermath after a fire, or in a disease situation or flood situation, the normal daily routine significantly changes, big time. So you need to be aware of that. And probably at this point, I should say that if you are considering putting these down, whether you're a manager or an owner of the place, right, you need to sit down with your staff or your family and say, hang on, when these cattle come in, you know, or we're going into difficult times and we're going to use this confinement area, things are going to change quite significantly. Because it's either, depending upon yourselves, it could be a daily operation, it could be every second day, or it could be only sort of like twice a week, depending upon how you've structured things. And that throws a spanner in the works, because, you know, like, it's no different from dairy farmers. When milking's on, milking's on. You're not late. And so consequently, you can't miss a day with the feeding. You can't say I'm on every second day and then all of a sudden we swing to every third day, and you're asking for trouble. So this concept of intensively feeding, you know, holding animals, feed, water, on a property, yeah, it is okay in a farming system because it's a temporary response to the problems. It'll be either drought, fire, flood, or a disease situation. So, you know, that's pretty important. Where on the other side, in a feedlot, quite obviously, there's commercial, well, we still want commercial gain, but they're doing it in a, what would you might call, intensive way to achieve weight gain for a very specific market outcome. And they do require council consent, developmental consent, because of the structures. I'll touch on site information and slope and drainage, but yeah, just bear in mind there's always a compromise there with it. For example, just at home in the sheep drought lots, I'll just call them drought lots or confinement areas, down the bottom end of the pens are always the problem area, and it's right in a gateway, so those gateways are now getting taken out and taken up onto the high ground. I'm just going to have to use the dog, you know, and myself to get sheep into the laneway to be fed and things like that. So, you know, yeah, so if you've got problems with drainage, then you do need to try to get on top of them. But the other, once, like I put mine back in when CMA, so it would have been halfway through the Millennium Drought, when CMA had some funds and I was still working with the department. I was able to get some of those funds and put the drought lot in. And in the interim, like, you know, quite a few years have gone past now, and I use, as far as the drought lot's concerned, they're paddocks in their own right. I use them for husband and, you know, a great swag of other things they can be used for. So it offsets the cost of the initial investment you go down to. I think one of the great things that, well, a lot of people that have got them in, this is probably one of the main points that they use them for, allowing for new pasture or crop, so they can put stock in there, supplementary feed them while the new pasture's coming on or the new crop is in a right position, then to put the stock back out. But they also can be just used in general management for yard weeding, quarantine areas. Excuse me. I only trade stock, so I just run all weathers. There is a small breeding flock of ewes in the system, but it's principally all weathers, and the same with the cattle. They're all just trading stock. So I use the pen structures, so when I'm buying and selling stock, they're in there. They're quarantine paddock areas for me before they actually go back out into the paddocks. Okay, into the nitty-gritty. Site selection. Of these up here, which ones do you think are the key problems, let's say in a drought? Which are the key issues out of those top few?
I would have said probably neighbours and community.
Neighbours can be, yep. Yeah. And the other one is dust. Odour doesn't tend to become an issue. If odour is becoming an issue, you might be hedging on the side a bit, meaning you might be doing it a bit too intensively. Noise is not a big, but definitely dust and your neighbours can be a bit of an issue. So but you do need to bear those factors in mind in where you might allocate the confinement area. These are the recommended buffers. And the other thing is, which is important in those buffers, if you've got old dip sites or anything like that, you need to take that into consideration. You keep them well away from those areas. But they're the recommended buffers. And this 1 in 100, is anyone in that 1 in 100 situation? No, okay. This is the slope, and if possible facing north. Okay, so the 2 to 4%. Most of you would have country around here that would be suitable in that slope range, would I?
When we go over to my site, it's 2%.
It's 2%. Well, that
might increase to 3.
Might increase to 3.
But
Yeah.
it faces south.
Sorry?
It faces south.
Faces south. And that's the issue. Why do you think we might need north-facing pens? Sunlight, yeah. Get maximum drying out time. after storm events. And that's the other thing that you've got to bear in mind. I don't know you, I know your country, but I don't know it as well as I obviously know the Tablelands country. But like in all difficult times, especially in drought, we can jag those interim bloody storm events. So it is important that you give due consideration of that, and it'll be great to see Marcus's, because then you'll have a reference benchmark of what 2% looks like. Table drains on the highway are at 3, depending upon where they are, but they're at 3 to 5. So that gives you an idea of what 5% looks like from a table drain point of view.
Greg, just quickly, when you say 2 to 4%, I'm assuming more than that, outside that range, isn't suitable? Like
No.
2.5 or 6, because
No.
it's too much, and then obviously less is...
Yeah. And the other thing is that 2%, if you like, is at the minimum end, but that's from front of the feed face to the back of the pens. Now, and again, all these things, they're always a compromise, you know, you just can't always get the exact site right. But if you can get the drainage right, like I thought I had the drainage right until we got a few storm events and down the bottom end of these bloody pens, what a mess. So I quickly realised after that the gateways have all got to change. So I just take them out, and I am putting a contour in so to redirect water.
I put the contour back in it, it's done nothing.
It's done nothing. No, okay. All right.
Maybe it's not high enough, but just, we can see it when we're over there potentially, but...
Yeah, okay, that'd be good, yeah.
My issue is that you've got to feed through the autumn break once the drought breaks.
Yep.
And that's when it's going to be wet.
Yep.
And you want your pastures year away, so you can't let them out the minute it rains.
True.
So you've got to be able to feed through the wet period.
The wet period, yeah. Yeah, all right. Well, we'll have a good look. Yeah, we'll have a good look while we're up there, yeah. In the, just I just keep relating to talk through it. I'm on a sandy loam, so I don't have a clay loam. So, you know, getting them wet, okay, you get the tops, you know, the top, say, 300 millimetres, foot of dries out pretty quick, but boy, she can be a spewy mess underneath. So, getting really heavy soils is not a good thing either. So, you know, but your soils are what you've got to work with. So, you know, so I think, you know, this is ideal, of course, then this becomes the more important thing to try to get dead right, if you can, or near enough to it. Think about access, right, in the system, and then proximity to stockyards, especially if you get ill health into the system. Okay. For example, I was talking to Brett Littler before. He's an LLS officer at Mudgee, and obviously the co-author in the manual. And Brett was saying that there was a confinement area done up in his area where the bloke actually had to, on a tractor, it took him an hour and a quarter to go out and feed. So you imagine the movements from, you know, the storage facilities out to this confinement area. It's just too much time's taken up. So you need to consider all those sorts of things. This is probably one of the most important things in the system that you've got to get dead right. You've got no questions not to get dead right. So this is the average, you know, I just reduced it down to young stock and dry stock. But I did a quick calculation. If you had one pen of 150 cows at 60 litres a day, which is pretty normal, sort of midsummer, you know. Maybe a little bit more, but I use 60 litres. I picked a bit of an average. It's 63,000 litres a week. And I then converted, it's 1 megalitre dam, 10 days. So they'll take they'll drink a 1 megalitre dam dry in 10 days. That's a lot of water. So I just want to make you fully aware that, you know, that's only 150 adult stock. 10 days. You might say, hang on, Greg, that doesn't work out. You've got to remember we lose 30% of evaporation over a 1 megalitre dam through our normal summers. That's just normal. So if it was full at the start, take 30% off, take 10% out of the slop out of the bottom, that's what you're left with. So, and it's about a 10-day supply. So water is a major consideration in the site selection. Now I don't know what would people be on. Dam water or bores? Bores. Okay. So, but
I would have thought a lactating female, I suppose getting towards the end of lactation, but she might be consuming 100 litres a day.
oh yeah, could be. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas
But I just
generally-
picked an average
Yeah.
each year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it just gives you an idea of just how quick water supply can go down. It's huge when you're talking relatively big numbers. Just be mindful of shelter in the system, and a northerly aspect obviously is mostly desired in that site selection. Okay. Any other queries before I flick over onto the next one?
In terms of shade,
Yep.
someone has said to me that you either have to give everybody enough shade or don't provide any, because they crowd and cause
That's correct.
heating of each other
Yeah.
if you don't give enough.
Yep.
Is that
Just,
your experience?
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, true.
Sorry, that's
So if you want to put shade into the system, yeah, principally you've got to allow an extra 2 square centimetres in the pen area,
Square metres.
square metres, sorry, in the pen area, right, for shade, right,
Per head.
per head.
So it gives them space to spread out. Or
Yep. Because not all of them will access the shade, but you've got to provide, you know, if you've got 150 head in there, so that's that's another 300 square metres of shade space, but not all of them will access it, not all the time.
We've planted trees and it probably hasn't been a great idea, perhaps, because there's probably not enough shade for everyone.
No.
But I don't know. The alternative is building roofs, I think. It's hard to think this should be bare when
Yeah.
in the middle of a drought you've got no shade. It's terrible.
Yeah, I would agree. I think with young stock, if you were, let's say you made the decision to early wean calves, I think I'd have a pen for early wean calves. I'd have a pen with shade in it for early wean calves.
That's
For
principle.
adult stock, I tend not to worry about, no. If the finances are in the system and you want to go down that path, well then, yeah. The main thing is to allocate it in the dimensions of the pen itself. The other thing is that does work well is having shade over the feed face. But when you start to do some of the calculations of feed face, hooly dooly, you know, it's a big cost in the system. So
So do you think animals need shade in the middle of, like, black cows? Are they going to not do as well if they don't have shade, or is it okay, or?
We had dairy heifers on adjustment at one stage in another property, and one mob had shade and the others didn't. And the ones that had shade sat under the shade instead of eating, because there was that comfort factor, where the ones without shade went to the feed bunker because they were standing in the sun no matter what. So they actually did better weight gains without the shade, because why stand in the sun if you don't have to? But if there's feed there and you might as well be in it, you might as well be eating. So it's catch-22. They were dairy heifers though.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
I would have thought a hot animal respires more and uses up more energy. Obviously that's not to bear out, isn't it?
It's a bit like in the case of sheep. You've got to have the three factors all locked in at the one point in time for sheep to be literally under stress, and that's wind, rain and cold. So as soon as, after shearing, as soon as they sort of get that first 10 centimetres of wool growth, if the three factors are not locked in, don't worry about it. So they've got pretty unique sort of ability to, what would you call it, withstand the elements, I suppose. But in the case of early wean calves, I would encourage shade in this opinion. So let's just move down these more pieces of information that you need to consider. Now, what I've tried to do through these slides is step through the thought process you might go through as well. So basically we've got minimum stock areas to consider. An important point is increasing stock densities to reduce infrastructure costs and to reduce the dust issues, which is for want of a better word, in a lot of the drought lots over this last drought, that was a pretty common practice because of the cost of the structure. Will increase the number of shy feeders and animal health problems. So pen length and trough length and pen area are really critical things to get relatively right. The other thing is, as far as cattle are concerned, these are sort of the mob sizes that you can make pens take. The interesting thing is, somewhere around that sort of 80 odd head in the weaner cattle, and somewhere in there around that 150. As soon as you go outside that 150, in the case of adult cattle, you will definitely start to find their social interaction starts to break down within the pen, and they become quite difficult to manage. So even although you can have 200 in a pen, and that's the last thing that you want. So once and this is the trough length. So what I wanted to do is just to take those figures and walk you through a scenario. Let's say you've got 300 breeding cows and we're going into a difficult time, let's say a drought. So you've decided to do an initial destock, because I think you'd be horrified. Oh, well, I'll walk you through it. Initial destock. So we've got rid of I'm going out to year 10, so our 9s and 10s have all gone out of the system. We've done a 15% cull in our 8s and 7s, and we're now down to 250 cows, plus calves, well, I made the assumption plus calves, and approximately, now those calves might not be in the system, they might be just 250, depending upon When you join, they might be just 250 cows in calf, plus your heifer replacements in the system. So when we do that, okay, so we've met our head size, so we're in, we're pretty conservative. 2 mobs of cows, 125. The trough length is going to be 75 metres long per pen. I hope I've done that calculation correct. That's 3/4 of a footy field for 2 pens. We just take the cows. If you don't scrimp on this. Because what happens if you scrimp on this, these figures here?
Shy feeders.
Shy feeders. Right. And that's the last thing that you want in the system, especially if you've done some pre-paddock management prior to coming in to the confinement area. Things like you might have started your mineral licks out in the paddock. You might have already, mate, because you've done this, you've now taken this and got them into what we might call your pen management groups. So, and you've done that in advance, because then you've allowed them to re-socialise before they get into the pen. As soon as you move them into the pen, even if you've done some of it out in the paddock, as soon as you move them into the pen, they will go through another re-socialising, especially at the feed phase. Okay? But if you can do some of this prior out in the paddock, for example, 40 to 50, so you might say, well, this group of replacement heifers, based on that number of stock, they don't go into the pens. They go out in, they pick around and I'll manage them differently. So, but if you can get some of the, the re-socialisation done out in the paddocks first, that's important. So that's the trough length, that's the square area based on this measurement up here for that number of cows. And so if that's the trough length, that's the depth. Just remember you've got to also account for your gateway systems in there. If we took the calves, we early weaned the calves is approximately, there's 3 pens of 83, so when you look at that, that's somewhere in there, that's a manageable number. We've got a trough length of 25, total square area, and then interestingly, once you do that, the depth of the pen are both the same, so they all line up. So you've got a 5 pen system. And so if you look at the total length, feed trough length, 75 plus 75, 150, plus 325, so that's about 2. So it's 2.5 footy fields lengths long. Now that's a lot. Now why am I stressing this? It's the cost factor and the time to put these troughs in if you're going down a trough system, but it comes back to this. So you've got to do that homework first of say, this is my herd structure, this is how I approach, let's use a drought as the example, a drought time. What are going to be my strategies? What can I physically manage in a confinement area? And if 250 cows, for any number of reasons, you don't want to manage that in the confinement area, you're going to think through this process of their management. And it might be, you say, well, hang on, I've got to come in and I've got to take bigger bites out of the system earlier. You might have to come down to call, which means spurling off 7s and 8s, coming back to 6. Early weaning your calves, fine, and taking a bigger, and maybe a bigger slice of your replacement heifers out of the system. Or you might say, one of the things we found up on the tablelands over the past few droughts is that this doing a piecemeal cull down all age groups is a great way to go early in the piece. And then, if you're looking, projecting out and you're saying, for want of a better word, shit's hitting the fan, I'll then start taking off full age groups back to cool, and then stop coming into the confinement areas. You know, so you've got to think through that process. I don't want to jump the gun on the pricing, but what's yours?
I was going to ask the group, what current pricing is for troughing, depending on what you use.
Well, when I did that calculation, my first reaction was, if I had 300 breeding cows and that was my herd, and we're going into a drought, I would be wanting to get it down even further than 250. Significantly down 250. Purely because of I'm a great fan of confinement areas, but the construction of this, even least cost, is going to take some time to do.
What water troughing is needed to cater for those numbers?
You'd still only have a single water trough in each of the pens, but in the case of the adult pens, you would have I forget the real big round ones in there. The secret with water and troughing for adult cattle is making sure that the flow rate coming out into the trough is adequate to handle mob drinking. Right? Because once one goes up for a drink, you'll probably get 30 going up to drink, 40 going up to drink. So if the changeover rate of the water is too slow, then you've got problems. So, anyone got any queries? So I just thought I'd put that in to just sort of, and please be critical. If I've made an error in that calculation, sing out.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I double checked it quite a few times. It horrified me when I first calculated. I was pleased to see that the depth of the pens stay the same, so that makes the structuring of the confinement area fairly good. But when I saw that, I thought, Jesus, unless people have got bottomless pits, I would want to be getting the cow numbers down for even further.
Where did the numbers come for the like centimetres per head of what they've recommended? Like, is that just is that an animal health? Someone's. Do you know where that? Or is that just?
No.
Mathematical or?
No. When I first went to Goulburn, which was quite a few years ago, there was a yard weaning research trial done at Camden, and that's where all those measurements were tested out. So it was based on the yard weaning and feeding research that was done at Camden. And then it was also tested out in the US, in their systems as well over there. It was sort of like a little collaboration. But yeah, 60 centimetres seems to be about the standard for adult cattle. And then obviously you come down as you go through.
So I've got a quote from June last year on concrete feed trough, $156 a metre. That sound right?
Yeah, pretty close. I was working on between $100 and $200.
Matt.
And for cattle, that's the option, is concrete? I've done a lot with sheep,
Well,
but not so much.
Yeah, well, I'll come to troughing,
Yeah.
because I think there's a few ways of short-circuiting the system. If you take your, have you handed out the, has everyone picked up one of these memos? Yeah, if you haven't, look at the front photo, right?
There's no concrete there.
Yeah, there's no concrete there. What can you glean out of that front photo? Photos tell 1,000 stories. Tell me what you can glean out.
Feeding cows,
Yeah, feeding cows,
Feeding on the ground,
feeding on the ground,
very cheap.
hot wires.
Very cheap.
hot wire system, so hang on, extend that hot wire system, extend it. Extend the thought process. What has had to happen before he started feeding?
They've probably spent more.
Bloody training, all right. Yeah, training of those stock. Well and truly.
It's on a slope.
Big button?
It's on a slope.
It's on a slope, yeah.
It's a cross slope, I think, by the look of it.
Yeah. Where's the feed out wagon?
Is it
Yeah,
on the,
outside.
That's in the pen.
In the pen.
looks like it's on the inside.
Yeah, it's on, in the pen, yeah. What else? So what, because the feed out wagon's in the pen, what is that now going to bring up? What problems, issues?
You have to get in the pen.
You've got to get in the pen, yeah. They're going to mob the bloody feed wagon, yeah. What else?
Wheel tracks.
Huh?
Wheel tracks along.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
The fence kind of looks temporary, so you can potentially move it if you needed to.
Yeah, you could, but you wouldn't. Why wouldn't you?
Animals
You
are
might move.
Well, animals will pick it up, but yeah.
The density, wouldn't it? The consistency of the feed out.
Partly.
They create
They're
a
eating
hard
on the.
pan.
They create a hard pan, and that in that photograph it was like rock, due to all the saliva when they're getting up the last bit of feed and everything. Yeah, just like rock. But let's say the feeder is in the pen. Stock would be chasing the feed wagon, unless you can get ahead. But what else is what else? I'll ask it. Is it a one-man operation?
Depends how you're getting through that gate.
Yeah, quick gate.
It's definitely.
I've contemplated putting a grid and like an automatic gate, but it's preferable if you're outside the pen.
Exactly. See, so these are all the things that you've got to consider when you start to, and of course this one is obviously quite important. You've got to rumble all this around. Okay, I better get a wriggle on.
No, you're doing fine.
So
About
of
3
all,
minutes.
so of all the designs, I wish there was a better design that we could come up with that would best suit cattle. So, feeding at the face of the pens seems to be the best one. In the case of sheep, having feed out, forget about the troughs there, having feed out in the laneway and you run your mobs out into a central feeding area to keep the cost of troughing down, it works fine with sheep because it gives you an opportunity to identify shy feeders, which can occur even with all the other preparations that you might have gone through to eliminate it. Extracting ill health out of the system, ill health animals out of the system very, very quickly. It happens, but in the case of cattle, having feed or troughing or the feed face at the front of the pen with the slope running to the back and the water back here or the water in the line there, seems to work the best for cattle and cattle management. But when you do that, you create within each mob a routine on a daily basis that you, or every second day, so that you've got to identify shy feeders, ill health, clean out feed troughs, clean out water, or check water and then clean out once a week for water. You know, so, you know, the whole system changes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would have assumed the internal fencing is a relatively negligible cost. It's still costly, I realise that, but it's a negligible cost to this cost at the feed face. Now you could do something simple like that, but recognise you've got to have a feed out wagon that can feed out bloody accurately on the ground in one pass. You've got to have extra bods in the system, either the open gates so you can get in, okay? You've got train stock, but it does work. Now he was feeding 50 head of cattle above the recommended pen area, so and it did work. But he always had, and he was feeding on a daily basis.
Is he feeding above the recommended area to allow him to pass through the area? Is that with his vehicle? Is that give him a bit more space? Maybe?
Maybe. But that's what you could do. You could, if you wanted to lessen the pressure at the... No. You could make your pens deeper, but that doesn't remove the problem of the feed face. They still require that feed face length, if you like.
So he must have found feeding on the other side of that fence that wasn't close enough for them or something.
Yeah.
Even though it looks like it drops pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just
I
surprising.
don't know. Don't know the answer to that one.
So, you talk about shy feeders often.
Would you go back?
Is that just a visual assessment you're talking about, or that you could?
I might need a hand with this, I'll try it, but if you, I'll just jump really quickly. You'll get this.
Right. Everyone else is eating, but I'm not.
Yeah, and in the case of, and I stuck this in because it's the classic example, significantly shorter than the volume of sheep. And look, they're all queuing up. And so, it's a real problem if you don't consider the feed face area, the feed trough length, or let's call it the feed face.
Is that 100%, you think, the size of the feed trough, or is it just actual animal behaviour as well, or some of it, they just want to eat in a...
Oh, there's just too many sheep for the length of the feed,
Yeah.
the feed trough. The feed's just been put out. And this is what you get. See, they turn back. And you've got this cluster group in here, all waiting, all queuing up. You get in there as soon as they get the dinner.
You need enough space for everyone to eat at the one time.
Exactly.
They will
Yep. Right, let me see if I can go back. Right. So the next thought process that you need to go through, if you've gone through you think you've rumbled through and you come down to your numbers and potentially, the number of pens, the length of the feed face, that sort of thing. One of the things that we learned in the Millennium Drought, and a classic example, I went down to delegate to Peter Jeffrey's place, and I don't know, some of you might know Peter, but big operation, probably no different from some of you blokes. And one of the things that we discussed with Peter, and we got it stuck in and did it over a few days and gave him a hand to do it, was we actually bought ourselves time. So I think the first thing, let's say you're going to get rid of these groups of animals, they're out of the system, then go through this, let's call it the leftover stock that you've got, and see what time you can buy. And the way you buy time, you buy it on fat score. But when you start to buy time, you've got to also know the weight and the age and class of the stock that you're dealing with, because that's going to affect your feeding and your feeding decisions. So, as an example, most of you should know how to fat score. The key sites to look at. Fat score 2, there's 2 plus, so we'll make the assumption that 2 plus is pretty well ideal to sort of maintain stock at. And if she's down at 2 minus, well then we've got to increase body weight by 0.3 of a kilo a day. And that would be the objective of the feeding decisions. Okay? Especially, if they're pregnant, you want to be trying to aim for that. Or somewhere between that and that. Okay? The important thing is, if you're buying time, is to recognise that a fat score is around 45 kilos in weight, live weight. And in cattle, they can lose that fat score in 1.5 months. So the decisions have got to be made early. It takes us as individuals to pick up a fat score change, a full fat score change. I'll start again. If a fat score's change, you've picked up a fat score change, right? That fat score change has occurred about 2 months, started to occur 2 months ago, 2 to 2.5 months ago. But it takes us that long to recognise it visually. So, but in difficult times when paddock feed is limiting, they can lose a fat score in about 1.5 months. So, but that's critical. You can buy yourself some time. So within those, let's say 250 cows, you might say, well, I can park them out. You might draft them up on fat score and weight. Purely because the next section, the feeding side, all depends upon those 3 things. Or 4 things. And it's the biggest cost in the system. Anyone got any queries or? So buying time, for example, myself and Peter and his offsiders went through his whole herd, we were able to identify 3 or 4 groups of animals, and he bought time with them and fed other groups differently. And I got a letter back once the drought had broken, this was in the 90s, and I got a letter back from Peter saying what we had done, in other words drafting up on fat score and weight before feeding and buying time, ended up saving him $63,000. I've never forgotten it. I'm pretty pleased with it. So then we come to the feeding decisions. Let's just talk early weaning calves. If you're going to early wean calves and feed calves, feed for weight gain. Don't muck about with them. Okay, that's the first thing. So, you straight away you're on this great target. If it's late pregnancy with the cows, well then that's the standard that the feed mix has got to be equivalent to. And there could be, depending upon the way and the decisions that you make, there could be some that you might feed tomatoes as well. So we can weaken off the protein and the energy. Everyone will have different decisions that they'll make here. Just recognise that fibre or roughage around that 10 to 20% is absolutely critical in the ration. And the chop length, if it's in a total feed mix, the chop length has got to be greater than an inch long, so greater than 2.5 centimetres or 25 millimetres in that complete feed mix. Some people will put out fibre first. That's the best way they handle it. They'll either always have it in racks in the pens, and so they're only putting the concentrate side of the ration down in the feed troughs, or into the feed trough. Excuse me. Others will actually have it in the mix and feed it out. You know, there's all different combinations. So you just got to think it through. But they will require that amount in their diet. The main thing here, has anyone had, wait a minute. What's the biggest problems with pellets if you go down that path?
Acidosis.
Acidosis, why acidosis?
Because they overconsume.
Well, they can overconsume, but generally a lot of producers feeding cattle use the small pellet size. If they go down the pellets, you want to make sure you get the bigger pellets, less fines in the handling of those pellets. So if you've got to auger them, well, obviously you've got to auger the darn things out to get them into feed wagons, and then they've got to get augered out again. You're getting less fines with the bigger pellets. So if you want to go down the pellet path, that's fine, but just get the big ones, don't get the small ones.
So they might 5 mil across or something?
Yeah.
Rather than perhaps 3 or?
3, yep. Yeah. So that's important. And no different from grains and or pellets. Pellets are made on cereal grains. You need to know from the manufacturer at the time of those pickup what is the base cereal grains that are in those pellets. Right? Now let's say it's barley. Because as the difficult period extends, you know what they're going to swing to, and that's going to be wheat as the base in those pellets. No different from you buying, you might have a store of barley and then run out and you've got to swing over. Next best thing that you can do is buy wheat and you start feeding that out. Well, I can tell you now that if you're not mindful of that change in the diet, the base grains, then you're going to have digestive problems in the cattle and or sheep, big time. So, and again, if you can preempt it, you can say, well, hang on, these cattle for the next 7 to 10 days in their rations, I'm just going to have to lift the amount of roughage in the diet and introduce the new type of grain that's in the feed, for want of a better word. Unless you want acidosis or problems in their diet. Because they can detect that change. Their gut system will detect that change very, very easily. Because stock to get on the minerals very, very slow. Even in the confined area, they'll dodge it. So start them early, let them know what that part of the supplement diet is. This is just my own. There's a lot of muck and mystery, for want of a better word, around all this. I just go out and buy a prepared feed mix. They're like 20 kilo bags, either from this mob or this mob, and that just goes in the lick. So I then doctor the lick. When I buy this, I then doctor the lick. They put a bit, in a lot of cases, they will have sufficient calcium, but I put more salt in, and this is already taken care of in these, so I just don't worry. to get these stock onto this system, I use a product called, it's dehydrated molasses. So the old name was Palabine. What's the one in the horse products? It's called Mollatine. And Mollatine's already high in calcium, so they're getting a great swag of calcium in their diet. But because it's dehydrated molasses, really easy to get stock onto that system.
We've got about 10 minutes left.
Yep. Okay. So now, not too much. So I've already mentioned that. We need to know fat score, weight, target performance you wanted. So target performance is either maintenance, or you're targeting late pregnancy, or you're targeting growth. Right? Okay. In the simple terms. Most cases you might not be getting, depending on those early weaned calves. You might tailor a different ration for those when they're at the tail end of their feeding stint. But you need to determine then are you going to feed daily, 3 times a week or twice a week in the system. I think with cattle you can get away with 3 times a week. I don't know what other people. 3 times?
Monday, Wednesday, Friday we do.
Yep. Marcus?
I was putting into bales into racks, so
Yes.
yeah, probably every second day.
Every second day? Yep. So once you calculate that, by calculating that, what impact does that have on the trough?
You need 3 days of feed.
Size, yeah.
The volume, the shape, the volume. Right? So as soon as you start to think, oh, okay. So you've got to check that. And we'll do that in a minute. So then you can calculate the foot. Once you know that, you then can calculate the feed out rate per pen and the frequency that you want. You can't say, I'm only going to feed. For example, if you're feeding daily, you don't need a trough. Unless you're putting a roughage in the diet, you probably don't need a trough with that sort of volume in it. You can get away with less, because the feed out rate's less. But if you're only feeding twice a week, holy dooly, you put some feed down in that trough, I can tell you. And that's what you need to calculate. Once you've done that, calculating out the feed out rate and kilos per pen per frequency, take it the next step and calculate the total tonnages, total cost, either over per week or per month, so you've got a snapshot of, what the total cost is, what the total tonnages are, so that you can get an idea that, hang on, my silos are up, or this hay volume is only going to last a month. I need to pre-order or source new feed 2 weeks down the path of getting started. So you've got to think all those sorts of things. There are 2 apps or 3. Everyone's done, I presume people in here have done programs with no grass feed. So that's one decision support tool that you could use to help you make some of the feeding decisions. I would encourage, this is the one that myself and others developed. It's much simpler to use as an app than this new one that's out. So this is the one I would get on your phone. It will do all these calculations for you. Okay, and it's a lot simpler to work through. For some reason, the department, after I pulled the pin on the department, they went down and rejigged this to include supplementary feeding, and to me, it's an app that's a little bit more complicated to use, but you people might be able to use it better than I can, but I struggle with it. So I can go back to the old one that's simple and gives you just as accurate answers, but it's simpler to use. This just shows you very, very quickly different ways of feeding out. Cottonseed, white cottonseed, that's what I feed at home. Okay, there's a problem in this trough. What is it? Can anyone pick it up?
Uneven.
Pardon?
Uneven.
Yeah, I didn't even pick that up, but yeah, what else?
The cattle, I'm not sure which side the cattle are supposed to be on, but cattle are on the right side of the photo?
Yeah, on that side, yeah.
On the left side.
Yeah, on the left-hand side of the photo.
I don't know how they're sticking their heads through those cables.
Well, that's the first thing, but they are. Yeah. The wastage. It's the trough shape, and I'll get to that in a moment. Okay. And it might be because,
It looks quite shallow.
yeah, that's part of the problem. Where this trough, simpler to make, quick, got more depth. Obviously, no roughage in the roughage in the diet, no hay in the diet. Therefore, it's a concentrate. It's well contained, and so there's very little wastage. Even with cottonseed, as you can see, you can get it all on the outside. But, yep. The other thing is to notice 1, 2, 3, 4. Probably get in there. 5, 6, 7, 8. You're probably around a tractor tyre. You could probably get 10, dozen, 15 odd head, all competing fairly well. The food face. So it's a pretty effective way of creating a food trough system. Now, before we come to some of the diseases and also some of the problems, let's just quickly have a quick snapshot of the routine. So first of all, you've really got to have accurate information to make these decisions with refeeding. So that's fat score, weight, class of stock, number of head, all the prices, all that's got to be at your fingertips. Remember that one? Most of you are aware of that. I won't go through that. Introductions and changeovers in diet, 10 to 14 days. Absolutely critical. Feed on the feeding day, identify shy feeders, bullying that goes on, and especially feed refusals. That'll be a quick snapshot that, hang on, there's digestive upsets occurring in some of the cattle. Clean feed troughs out. Please, don't go down the feed trough and clean it out and leave it at the end. Because like God made little green bloody apples, some cattle will be able to find the dump at the end and hook into it. Okay? So if you clean your troughs out into a barrow or into the back of the ute, take the bloody stuff away. Don't leave them at the end. The other important thing is, even with, especially in the winter time, with heavy dews, right, if there's grain left in the trough, right, that'll ferment overnight. That'll start to ferment, and they will pick that up in their smell when the next load, especially if you feed over the top of it. So, principally, feeding out in a trough system, straw broom, walk the length and sweep it out before you put the new feed in. While you're on your feet, you go around and check your water trough, check flow, check cleanliness. Now, if it's at the end of the week, excuse me, it's the end of the week, let's say, you're going to clean it out. Just remember that when cattle graze grain in a trough system, or even if it's processed, they'll collect grain under the tongue. So then they go and drink, that grain falls off into the water trough. Now, it's not a real big problem in the winter time, but in the summertime, that grain in that water trough starts to ferment. And they can pick that fermentation up and turn themselves off the water. So it is absolutely critical that you clean water troughs out. And in cleaning them out, try to drain the water away from the feed face, away from the cattle, or down the slope or down the fence line, so it's away from the system. Not always possible. The main thing is make sure that there's always clean drinking water in the system.
Greg, just back on the cleaning the feed troughs out.
Yep.
I've been contemplating getting these concrete feed troughs, and I'm concerned they're going to fill up with water, like if they're on a flat slope. So do they have to drain to one end, or are they drain into gaps between them? Or
you could do, but if they drain towards, you're going to get the movement of dust, feed dust, for want of a better word, feed fines, all into the gap.
I won't, they just block up.
Yeah, I'd rather you put your, you know, on a slight slope to get it there.
So, yeah.
Unless you can butt them right up to where there's just such a minimal gap that it's not going to be an issue.
They're going to be quite long troughs to drain. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No. I was just thinking about the issue. Let me just stew on that.
Yeah, you've got to have.
I know we
you've
have.
got to get lucky and have the perfect site, or you've got to create that slope. You know,
Yeah,
earthworks.
Yeah. We had concrete ones when I was at Tocal in the feedlot, and I remember now that they drained. Oh, it was only a minimal drainage, like it might have been only half a degree to one end, but we still had to clean them out all the time.
Yeah.
But you don't want troughs. If you're going to get the slope right, you get the slope right. So you don't want welling occurring in between the sections. That would be the worst thing.
Yep.
Because then you've got another job to do. You've got to have a bucket with you or a broom, and you're trying to flick it out and get all the grain out and everything out.
Yeah, anything that's repeated has to be very easy to do.
Yeah. I never gave much thought to this, but when I read this, I did a little bit more reading. This is a great point. So now, to just try to remember, when you're going, just while you clean the feed trough out, you're walking through the cattle, you walked over to the water, you know, obviously the cattle are getting stirred up, but maybe on the entry in, or partway through the day when you're doing another job, take a note of how many cattle are actually sitting down and ruminating. And it should be around, it should be greater than this 40%. Because if they're not ruminating, right, they should be either eating, drinking, or sleeping. Well, sleep that much. But yeah, so it's a good way to just see the behaviour of what's happening in the pen. Around 40%, greater than 40% should be, should be ruminating. Great one. Obviously start to look at dung. We'll discuss that in a moment, but I've been very observant of what the dung pats look like. Will give you a clear indication of fibre protein and if there are any digestive upsets. But this shy feeder, and especially, and also pink eye in the last, and I mean just the last drought, was a huge problem up in the Hunter Valley. Absolutely massive problem. I think the strongest recommendation would be with pink eye, as soon as you identify it, that tear, take the animal out, get it into your hospital pen or get it into the yards and treat straight away. You don't hesitate. The speed in the last drought, the speed at which pink eye went through mobs of cattle was just unbelievable. especially in confinement areas. So that's one that you need to be really observant with. Shy feeders, yeah, if you can identify them quick enough, get them out. Put them as a cluster group in a small area. Maybe I'm reluctant to put shy feeders back into paddocks and then bring them back in again. So if you had a specific very small area, it might have a little bit of grazing in it, but you've got an opportunity to get a bit of TLC as far as feed is concerned, and then they could come back into the system once they're picked up in weight.
Do they often transition back in well once they've increased weight?
Oh yeah, they do. As long as they're on the go, like they're picked up, you can visually see it. So once you identify shy feeders, they're out of the system for nearly a month before they come back into the system.
And they don't become a shy feeder again?
No, as long as they've picked up in weight. It's usually weight that's the problem, or they've had a digestive or in ill health, and they've got over that, or any number of reasons. Just remember, if you're making your own roughage in a total diet, you want that scratch factor. So that's greater than the 25 millimetres, somewhere around that 2 inches as I do. I'll come back to the ill health one. We'll just see how.
We're running a little bit over time, but if you just want to cover off on key stuff for about 5 minutes, that'll be fine.
Yeah. So this is I just talked about, this is an introductory ration. What do you notice very, very quickly about it?
Lots of fibre.
Lots of fibre. Long chop length, right. It's got grain in it, but you can barely see it, can you? So in that introductory period, make sure your diet has got large amounts of fibre and introduce over that 10 to 14 days. So if you do this right, it will make then the feeding stage very, very simple. And then all you've got to do is just monitor changes in whether it's barley you're using or wheat you're using or oats you're using. That swap over period, you've just got to be careful. Here's a pen system, and the drainage is the wrong way, and you can see it all starting to build up. You also can get a bit of a snapshot if you don't get the drainage right. You can see the lean in the system, the blood rates. We've talked about the shy feeders. More so in sheep, but you want to keep fecal contamination out of the feed trough or the feed area. So even in that photograph, although they cleaned up the feed off the ground there, that bloke would walk along before the cart came out and basically swept the ground, making sure that the feed there was no shit on the ground or anything like that. So the feed face was nice and clean. Now, this is what I want. Right. Anyone have that problem?
Yep.
Yep. Alright, so one reason for cleaning troughs out on a regular basis, that can happen pretty quick in summer. How do you get around it from happening? Or, I shouldn't say get around it, won't remove it totally, but will help limit it. Hang a piece of copper pipe in there, okay? So just hang a piece of, copper pipe off there, and it'll limit the algal build-up quite significantly. Okay? Okay, if you have a look down on this photo, it's not the best. It didn't sort of... What do you notice, what have they had to include in the feed face fence to stop the limit or limit the amount of wastage of roughage in the diet, in their feeding? It's not in their diet, in their feeding. Because you can see, look at all the... What they had to... In the construction, what have they had to do?
angled the fence.
Yeah. So they stick through and they've had to put a, and in the case of that, there's another photograph in the manual there. In some of them, they might have to put 3 of them, like 1, 2, 3, in to stop the feed. Why is there wastage coming from there onto there? It's the way they graze, isn't it? Yeah, the way they get the feed. But it's the structure of the trough too. Good troughs are structured like this. Okay. There's the feed face. So the animal sticks its head in and they can push up and roll up. No wastage. Now you might think that this is not a big issue. You get in 6 months down the track of feeding and that, and you start to realise that wastage of roughage and wastage of maybe the part of the concentrate does become a significant cost in the system. So this is just these are just sort of standard measurements. The thing I would encourage you to do, if you're gonna, you don't have to go down the concrete path. Okay. You could construct, if you decide to make this out of belting, then have the feed measure the overall distance. Hopefully you can get belting near enough to that size. Keep this one approximately the feed face side, 21. Up here, make it higher so you're not getting the wastage going out. You understand what I'm trying to say? The other thing is, this is the volume area that's required. Right, so when you, even if you're doing it out of belting, you can get it, you can measure the volume that your trough has got. You might say, well, I'm doing 3 days of feed, this is how much is going to feed out, this is how much is going to go down the trough length, therefore I need a volume of X amount. Okay? Few calculations to be done. Now,
so some of the images in this book show belting flat on the ground with just the face
lifted,
and the
yep.
back edge flat.
Yeah.
Which looks like it's probably easy to clean, but
well, I did.
The stock are going to push the feed away from themselves and might need to be pushed back.
Exactly. I did some. I picked up on the same. I did some reading. Oh, well, a bit of hunting last night before I came out.
I think it's that page.
Yeah.
That image, it's on page 9. There's no real. I don't think. Maybe it's a small lip at the back.
Ah, yep.
Looks like it's flat on the other side of the road.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can see this wastage, I suppose, beyond the building.
Yeah.
I don't know how
I think, just in my quick look at it, I think there's too much volume. It's not, if you like, it's not U-shaped enough, the trough.
No.
I think if he made it more U-shaped, he's done the right thing by putting it up the fence line, up the feed fence, right? But if he made it more U-shaped, it would have been better.
Probably get less wasted.
You'd probably get less wasted. Just to give you an idea, because it's another set of, you might want to write them down. In the case of cattle, maximum height is 2, on this side, on this side is around 500. But you can come down to about 400 on this side, on the feed face side. And really it doesn't matter, how much you extend up. Maybe that, if you're going to do it out of belting, that might be the limitation of the width of the belting.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah. Now, in the case of sheep, if you're going to go down this effort, and you're also going to use the same system with sheep, you need to know these figures. So with sheep, they can only handle 360 to 460. So this feed face is somewhere between 460, so 460, 360. So But sheep can actually get up nearly as high as cattle on this face. But ideally it needs to be, so the height of the feed face is 360 to 460 with sheep, and maximum is somewhere around that 500 with cattle. So if you were going to use the same system for sheep, then you want to make this feed face somewhere around the, well, you'd get away with 400, something like that. Still suit cattle, but you make this lip come up. That's the main thing, to limit the wastage.
So, are you using building group?
Yeah, love it. Yeah. So I obviously access building using. I use Andromeda cable from Andromeda, this wire rope. I use the twisted Andromeda cable. You just pull it with a track and put a D buckle on it, and self tensions, and they can give it a fair nudge. The other thing is that if you're on the scrounge to make limit some of the costs, if any of you know any, I don't know if there are any major crane manufacturers down in this area, like DMAG or what's the other one? Those crane manufacturers, like DMAG, the wire rope in those cranes is always on the changeover. They've barely got to get a fray, and they've got to be stripped out and replaced, and they just bin the lot. So I had a deep. My brother knew the DMAG rep in Sydney, and I got a load of wire rope from them. So
Is that in pen construction? Or?
Just pen construction, yeah.
You won't have a curl in it, but it'll just be a straight. You won't have the twist in it.
No, won't have the twist in it. A little bit, and usually that wire rope from the crane manufacturer is pretty hard to handle. Like it's not.
It's heavy.
But yeah, you need, in trying to construct it, you need a couple of bods to give you a bit of a hand doing it. But if you're not paying anything for it, that's the job. I just wanted to, last thing. Sorry. I know you all, I'm not going to, I'll talk about the ill health up in the paddock, if you like. As we've done. I want to go right back to the very start. That's what I wanted to show you. I should have done it. What apart from the concrete feed troughs, you notice even both of these, dead level, look, wastage. Okay, so you've got to get that lip up the front. What's the other little construction thing in that photo that might be worth considering and making that feed face work really well for you?
A little height adjustments.
Yep. Make a little herringbone somewhere down the system. Understanding, okay, they've got them locked in like that, you know, I've got, you can do it any way you like, but just making a little herringbone, because you'll construct it, and you'll construct it for cows, and then all of a sudden you might put early, next year around, you don't even think of it, you put early weaned calves in there, hop your trough entry by the cattle.
They've attached the post inside the trough.
Well, theirs are, but you know, like if you've got.
If you're scraping up later on, cleaning out that side, that makes it easy to scrape.
Yeah. I would have had them on the other side, or you know, like more than likely you're going to have either stiles or straight. Well, 3 metre spacings of stiles, and then every, oh, geez, I would suggest probably every every 10 metres you put a strainer in. At the feed face, I'm not talking about longitudinal fences, just at the feed face, because there's pressure on that feed face is incredible. But, you know, you've removed that triangle out of the system because you've got it now an extended trough and you can adjust the height correctly.
So, like, obviously that initial photo we saw was electrified.
Yeah.
Either electrified or cable works.
Yeah. But you've got the training with the electrification.
Yeah. It doesn't put them off feeding electric.
No, they get used to it. But I can tell you now, for about the first 4 feeds, boy, there was some fixing of fences. Pushing through it, they weren't trained.
Is that every time? Oh, basically every time.
Yeah.
Because often cars aren't trained like that.
No.
Are they trained, I mean, like when you say that, are they, the rest of the farm or the paddocks they were in previously, they had electric fences or?
Yeah, they did.
So they knew the electric fence, they just didn't know when they were that particular wire or something?
That's exactly right, yeah. It's a bit like, you know, if you've got...
So they were paddock trained but not, feed confinement feeding.
Yeah, they knew to be cautious of it.
Yeah.
But shit, the feed was pretty good down there and they... Bang!
Yeah.
You see where I feed, I fix the, I put 400 or 500 calves through there a year and I'm always fixing the fence once. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something spooks them and they brush it.
Yeah.
And it's a pain in the ass.
This is...
So, and that's electrified.
Yeah.
It's heavy wire, but it's, I think cable's probably a better bet.
Yeah. Yeah. I've on the I don't know what they call it, but the reverse twist andrometer cable is self-tensioning, see, so you can get a fair tension on it, and
I think it's got to stay tight.
and it stays tight. And you don't, thinking about it, you probably only need that type of cable down at their neck height. The ones up above could be even much thinner cable, don't have to be reverse twist, but just to, you know, keep stock in.
I think they sell one that's small enough that you can actually strain with a pair of wire strainers.
Oh, is that right?
There's so many strands in it, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, mine is about, it'll be about half my little finger.
Yeah.
So it'll be about 8 mil.
8 mil, yeah.
Something like that.
This might be a 6 mil one perhaps, but
Yeah.
apparently you can grab it with a strain.
See, so, yeah, I would have had, you know, I would have liked a herringbone height adjustment here, but that could be the reverse twist cable, and then you could just go to planes. You probably don't even need that.
Obviously that was got a top bar, lower all that on.
Not essential. No. But it's obvious if it, you know, it depends upon how often you're going to use it, and if it's going to become part of the farm system and that, you might go to the effort. Initially, to get the thing underway, you might say, well, bugger the top wire. Oh, I'll just put a top wire on it, and I'll come back through.
Is that what you're going to talk about, Tanisha? About how often you use it?
Yeah,
spread out
aspects
costs?
of, yep, spread out.
Anyone got any queries or questions? Sorry for going over a bit.
That's all right, so long as you guys are getting value out of it.
Yeah.
That's my consolation.
Yeah, all right. Anyway, I'll touch on a bit of ill health while we're up, having a wander up in the paddock. So to finish up, I think the main thing is, you know, it needs some sitting down and doing calculations and working out, starting off with what am I going to come down to. Even before you start saying, well, I'm going to construct 4 pens, or even going out to the site, you've got to know what you're going to be working with. You know, it might be early weaning calves in one group, replacement heifers and first calvers out in the paddock, and on lick feeders or trough out in the paddock. That's their system. But the rest are coming in, and this is what I'm going to be dealing with. And before you even, start looking at sites, and then you're going to start. Oh, I'm going to be feeding this. Therefore, the trough has got to be this shape. Therefore, I'm going to have this amount of materials, and it builds on itself if you follow a logical step. So hopefully I've done it that way and showed the interactions that you need to consider. It'll be great to see your costings. All right, let's have a break.